Welcome everyone to our Youth Development and Nature Connection workshop. My name is Tanya Papa. I am the Cities and Youth Engagement Manager at the Children in Nature Network. My pronouns are she, hers, and I join you from the ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people, known as Common Day Fort Collins, Colorado. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I speak these words of acknowledgement to help renew and reaffirm the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands, as well as the heritage and painful history of those who have come before us and are still with us today. I invite those of you who know your land history to acknowledge your own in the chat, as well as introduce yourself. You can see we've dropped a link in the chat for you to figure out where you may reside. And this is a resource for North Americans to find out more about their local Indigenous territories and language. So we'll give folks a couple minutes to share where they're calling in from. And while folks are doing that, we did want to share a few ways that you can go beyond a land acknowledgement. So outside of this practice, you can also educate yourself on Indigenous history and movements. You can advocate for land back to the Indigenous peoples from whom it was taken. California has actually done a wonderful job of being an exemplar in that work. You can follow Indigenous social media accounts to reshare and amplify their voices year-round. And you can support Indigenous science, causes, and businesses. Welcome, Francis, Megan, Catherine. Thanks for sharing where you're calling in from. And thanks for being here. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to share where they're calling in from. And if you just joined, we can drop the native land map resource in the chat again. And feel free to keep plugging away in the chat, but we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So today's workshop, as you all know, is about the intersection of youth development and nature connection. And in today's workshop, you will get to learn about the research we have on this topic, hear from our lovely guest speakers on their efforts within this space, have time to discuss with your peers, and ask questions at the end. And when we think about nature engagement, it's not about connecting to nature as the end goal. It's about weaving elements of youth development and nature engagement together to achieve the positive outcomes that we all want for the earth and for young people, for them to reach their full potential. I'm going to lightly talk about the graphic in front of us, and I encourage you all to check out our Youth Development and Nature Connection Toolkit to dive in deeper. You can see the link was just dropped in the chat as well. So our literature review with the Search Institute and discussions with folks in partner cities showed us that nature engagement is a way for youth development organizations to achieve their goals, and being intentional about attending to youth development priorities in nature-based programs allowed for the opportunity to be that much more impactful. So we developed this graphic to illustrate this idea of connection to nature and youth development practices really coming together to achieve the critical outcomes related to cultural and community connection, which you'll see at the top there, leadership skills, sense of agency, and personal development. And today I'm excited to have our two guest speakers, Shandiin and Tess. We can move to the next slide, thank you. Welcome, and I invite you both to introduce yourselves, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, and what inspired you to be part of this work today.
Thanks, Tanya. We can go to the next slide. There's a neat map that I would just like to show. So thanks everybody for putting your locations and whose lands you're on in the chat. We just wanted to put this little map up to also show where Tess and I are in relation to the lands we're on and where we're presenting today. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Sayat Shae Shandiin Nez Yanishia, Hashbushinishla, Nasha Bashishkin, Tachini Deshache, Adu Kiane Deshanella, Tohana de Nasha Ada Natnajake Hoshtem. So good morning. My name is Shandiin Nez. I am Med Clan, born for the Bear Clan. My maternal grandfather's clan is Red Running Into Water, and paternal grandfather's clan is Towering House Clan. And I'm originally from the Totalina, Two Gray Hills area on Navajo Nation, and I currently based out of Gallup. And my pronouns are she, they, and them. So I've been doing conservation core work since 2013, when I did my first orientation up in Durango, Colorado. And it was a pretty intense experience for myself. I wasn't able to get like the whole ancestral lands experience at that point because I didn't know they existed yet. But I had been doing conservation work since 2013, and in 2019 joined Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps up until last fall. And I think a major part of what has inspired me is being that person that looks like me, or like looks like them, or shares identities and the same lived experience, to share that kind of same development that I went through the conservation core world, and just developing and gaining confidence in myself and trying to kind of be like that bigger sister or bigger auntie for all of like my, my cousins and relatives and everybody else in between. And I think also for me, I don't have like a traditional pathway in the way of getting a degree or finishing college, but I have somehow made it into like staff roles and been able to like share my wealth of knowledge and experience and create safer spaces for people. So that's what inspires me.
Okay, you can go on to the next slide. So hi everyone, my name is Therese Ryley. A lot of people call me by my nickname Tess, so feel free to call me whichever you feel most comfortable with. I enjoy both my names. I use she, her pronouns, and I put these two pictures up because I want to share a story of like what really inspires me to do the work that I do. So the picture of the city is a picture of Philadelphia, which is on traditional Lenape land. And I live in Salida, Colorado, or Southern Ute land now. And a lot of people always ask me, did I go from living in a really urban environment, growing up in a really urban environment, to really being surrounded by national forests now. I want to share a story about the last night I was in Philly with my mom before I moved to Colorado. We were driving through West Philly in an area that I grew up in, but it's also an area that there's a lot of rundown homes, there's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of poverty, and I remember turning to my mom and saying to her, I'm going to miss being here and seeing how beautiful it is and how special it is that, like, as someone who grew up here, I can see that beauty, because I know people who aren't from here often don't see it when it's in front of them. And my mom was kind of like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, the community, like Philadelphians really band together, and in the face of like really poor infrastructure and so many various social issues and environmental challenges, Philadelphians have this community resilience that really like raised me and made me who I am, and I'm very proud of. And so in the picture to the other side of the wildfire, that kind of commitment to community and knowing how much community can get done is what I see as our solution to climate change. So there's so much climate science. I'm a social scientist myself, but I know that a better future is before all of us, because when we can like create community with one another. And so that really inspires me to do the work I do, is to really build community in order to face our climate change challenges. Awesome. Well, thank you both for introducing yourselves. It's a nice reminder to hear that our connection to nature can be vast, and the journeys that bring us into this space all look very different, but we share common goals. So to dive into today's topic, can you both share how your programs have combined youth development and nature connection?
Thanks, Tanya. So with Ancestral Lands, they work with different tribal nations, not only through crew programming, like sending folks out into the woods or other public lands for days at a time with each other, but also through individual placements where we place young adults with different agencies. So with Ancestral Lands, they're really connecting young adults back to one another, to the land, to community, especially like in the face of what the land and people have experienced after violent colonization and the continued violence of colonization that we see. And so there's a lot of tribal climate resilience. There's a lot of cool programming with a couple of our offices, such as Farm Corps with the traditional farming and challenging food sovereignty in Acoma Pueblo. They also have like a youth hiking program that takes children out into hike or either sacred places or around like their own homelands. So with our programming, like really encouraging youth to take on like those challenges, develop it through outdoor leadership. Again, you can see in this photo, which I went into the backcountry with these folks and did not prepare them very well, but we all learned a lot from going into the backcountry. And besides like all of their challenges, they were still able to complete the project that they did in the face of like a potential flash flood and, you know, heavy gear and everything, being far away from home. But Ancestral Lands is like really focused on connecting those participants with homelands and encouraging them to also take up those spaces and like conservation industries that can be tough to be in. I think we all have like a good feeling for like what that looks like right now, building confidence, challenging ourselves and taking more decolonial approaches involving like traditional ecological knowledge when appropriate, and also at the same time like not delving too much into like our own stories and cultures where it's not appropriate to share some of those like stories and teachings. But yeah, that's kind of how we do that through a lot of different things, either sending 5 people out into the backcountry or having them help with a hoop house that's located at the senior center and providing food to community and themselves.
Great, and you can move to the next slide. So the program that I'm going to talk about is one that we get asked a lot of questions about. So I figured it might be what people would like to learn more about. But I'm based in our office here in Salida, Colorado. We've run for a few years now, the Leaders of Color program, which provides really rigorous training in natural resources management skills. So you see in one photo, they're at the Great Sand Dunes National Park with chainsaws, and in the other, in the Sangre de Cristo mountain range with crosscut saws, getting various certifications. And this is a program for Black, Indigenous, and other young people of color, really kind of inspired by wanting to be able to give people back home from like those neighborhoods in West Philly an opportunity to experience these really beautiful places that historically our communities of color have been excluded from, but also creating this really advanced job training program to not only help place our participants in jobs and natural resources, but make sure that they're really prepared to take on leadership roles in those industries. And I'm really proud and excited to share that I have a lot of project partners who are graduates of our program. It's really cool to go to a meeting and it be run by someone who graduated from the program a few years ago. And so it's been really exciting. But I think that providing that connection to nature, especially spaces that various communities have been excluded from, is really empowering, but also then going through this process of getting these certifications and supporting one another through a very challenging program, really creating those bonds that help foster a lot of the things that Shandiin mentioned, like confidence and like really belief in oneself to get through the program, but then to like continue on in the industry. So.
Great, thank you both. I think next we have the video test. Did you want to share anything about the video before we dive into that?
Yes, thank you, Tanya. I totally forgot about the video. So this is a video. It features members not just from our Leaders of Color program, but also from our Women's Plus program. And they're doing a really neat fire mitigation project in our service region. So they're talking about their experience in the program and how it's impacted them.
And we are just going to share a small clip of this video with you all, but we'll be sure to drop the link in the chat so you can watch the full version on your own.
We are working on this private land as part of an easement. So basically the people here have given us permission to do some forest management on their land, not only to make themselves more resilient to fire, but also to make the greater area more resilient to fire as well. This entire area is part of a larger watershed, so all of the water that flows through here actually ends up being the drinking water in Buena Vista.
It's my first time getting paid to do any firework, and being that I've wanted to be in the fire service since I was 14, this has been a really awesome, excellent opportunity. This fire mitigation project is meaningful to me because essentially what we're doing is helping the individuals who live in this area so that when fires come through, it's not going to put them in bad situations. And to think that I'm making that change in other individuals' lives is really fulfilling. The conservation core work has helped me find my love and passion for nature and realize that I want to work outdoors.
Awesome. We can move to the next slide, please. And before we dive into this, I just want to say that, watching that video, it's a reminder that when we give young people room to share about their experiences and take ownership of it, we can really see them step into a leadership role within themselves and within their community. So thank you both for sharing. And before we go into our breakout groups today, we did want to zoom out a little and share more about the research process and define what we mean when we talk about nature-based and youth development programs. For some of us, we might find ourselves more leaning on the youth development side, and for others, we might be more on the nature-based side. And from the example shared from Shandiin and Tess, you can really hear the way that they both have integrated both youth development and nature. So these are some of the findings from the research process. So youth development is a broad field employing a wide range of approaches to achieve youth outcomes. Typical approaches we often see is social emotional skill building, strengths-based, relationship building, experiential learning, and they are often youth-centered. And if we move to the next slide, please.
So like youth development, nature-based programming is also an expansive field that includes many different approaches and outcomes. Typical goals of nature-based programming include physical health and fitness, mental health, and overall well-being. We have cognitive outcomes as well, which include improved concentration, focus on tasks, attention, and memory. We also have this sense of environmental stewardship, a feeling of being more connected to nature and environmental justice behaviors. And we also see this encouraging effort for young people to pursue green and environmental career paths. And we can move to the next slide, please. And so when we think about integrating nature and youth development principles, we might wonder where we are on this axis. And so before we go into our breakout groups, I'd love for you all just to take a moment to think about where you would place yourselves. We're not going to have you physically place yourselves just because there's so many of us and it might make Google Slides melt down a little. But just imagine where you might put yourself and take that with you into your breakout groups.